Hey, welcome to the Cam and Otis Show. This week, one of my good friends from down under, Phil Hayes, is joining us again. Repeat guest, so that means we didn't scare him off the last time, which we always appreciate. And also the founder of Drop Bio. And I just want I know we weren't talking about Drop Bio in the green room, but there's some really cool stuff. So I'd love an update on what's going on with Drop Bio right now, Phil, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Otis. So great to be back with you guys, Camden. Great to see you again. And I think what a year, right? Since we last caught up, it's actually been probably closer to two years on the podcast. And I think we here in Australia have had a very different experience to what most of the rest of the world has had, but that's coming back to be a little bit different now. And Drop Bio for us, we've been working on that business for more than 3 years now. For those that don't know, Drop Bio was born from the idea of understanding in real detail the role that chronic inflammation plays in humans. And for us, there's literature going back easily 3 or 4 decades that talks about how if you're able to measure inflammation and the markers that make that up in your blood and in genetics and in lifestyle, then you're able to predict the onset of chronic disease 4 and 5 years before it actually begins. And so that can mean everything from diabetes to arthritis to any condition you would think about being chronic in nature. Cancer falls into that group as well. And for us, we became really interested in, how can you democratize that kind of knowledge so that people can do more with their own individual lives. And this was before COVID, so there was not maybe the emphasis on individual personalized health as there is now. And that was one of the major shifts for us in COVID. So what we were able to do was to look at finger prick arterial blood that was collected remotely. So we would send you a little kit. You would lance your finger like most diabetics would do most days. Mm-hmm. We collect a small volume of blood that can either be a dry blood spot or it's a small, a small sample of liquid blood. And it comes back to our lab. We do some really interesting analysis and we're able to tell what all these markers are doing and form a pattern. Think of it a bit like a Rubik's Cube for a condition at a particular point in time. We measure that over time. And then we can start to see, what the emerging health patterns are, even for most people that think they're actually pretty fine. And the idea there is that, for most things, you can adjust lifestyle quite quickly to take those kind of things into account, which is excellent. Obviously, there's some things you can't. But for us, it was quite a set of discoveries that we were able to make. And then it became clear that that was really important to fertility. So women and couples who are going through IVF, inflammation plays a massive role because pregnancy in and of itself is an inflammation event. And then when COVID arrived, notwithstanding the evolution of telehealth, which doesn't really have a diagnostic backbone to it yet, that's still all being built out. We play a pretty material role there now. And so we've had to grow and run pretty quickly. We launched our first wellbeing product, which is known as Wellbeing by Drop, in about 6 weeks' time, which we're really excited about. And then I think the last thing to say is that, the mental health load that's come around to most people in the world since COVID started and before, this has been the load has been growing for some time. We have started to use those same markers to create what we think is one of the first objective rapid triage models to help individuals who feel as though they're suffering of changing mental health to be triaged towards the right model of care. And so at the moment in the US and in Australia and the UK and many countries, if there is a mature healthcare network that supports mental health, it takes a long time to get the treatment you need. This model is designed to make that more objective, to make it more immediate, and to help people get the care they need sooner without making a diagnosis. This is about putting you down the right path to get the right care at the right time. So that's a massive opportunity for us. We're working hard. They're long days, but it's a very worthwhile investment in time, and I love it.
Yeah, yeah, and it's just some amazing stuff. That's why I just had to get that update, and because I appreciate what y'all are doing. It's just really that's cutting edge stuff, And you mentioned the telehealth. Yeah, that's really what we're doing right now. Hey, how you feeling? Kind of that stuff. But to start doing more of this immediately transferable and predictive technology for our own health benefits. That's amazing, man. Thanks for that. Thanks for that update. So the other thing I was thinking is, well, now you're down under, it's wintertime, but you're
Yeah.
also you had another outbreak, and we're dealing with that. And, you know, we kind of hear, I think here in the US, we kind of hear about it and nothing's really happened. I think because they're afraid of a bunch of Americans rioting on the Capitol again. I don't know, but yeah, I'm just kind of curious how y'all are handling that. How's your family doing with having to, you know, shut the doors all up again?
Yeah, look, I appreciate it. I think you know, we for most of Australia, even up until about 2 weeks ago, you know, we're a 25, 26 million person sort of island. And we had half of our population in lockdown over the last sort of fortnight. And that was because there was a view that there was a new strain that had come through, known as a Delta strain now. And, you know, it's a normal biological evolution, right? The viruses are trying to work out and muscle out each other. And it's a standard kind of play for what happens in virology. But, you know, we had to do this a year ago pretty aggressively. And it was a real shift. I think the country, for the most part, in one of our southern states, Victoria, went into a really prolonged, I've forgotten the number of weeks, but it was a long time. And it was everything from people aggressively having to move to work from home, homeschool, and then somehow not leave the house. And, you know, we're an outdoor nation, right? We're into our sport. We love to do a whole bunch of stuff, and it's difficult for a lot of people to go from something to nothing. Personally, you know, we found it really difficult to homeschool really young children. At the time, we had a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. They're now a little bit older, but the young kids couldn't read. You know, they're in kindergarten, right? So trying to have them on Zoom calls and with their teachers. The teachers did an amazing job, right? Like they did absolutely the best they could, and they left nothing on the track. But we were still running our businesses at, you know, 16, 17 hours a day, having to try and homeschool and everything else. And it was tough. And, you know, the Sydney and New South Wales, we got out of that pretty lightly. We had about, I've forgotten how long it was, but it was much shorter than our colleagues south of the border. And this time around, like most times, most things in life where you see it a second time, you sort of know what to expect. So the implication, the impact is not as harsh. We don't like it. We don't enjoy it. And we've had, you know, 4 vacations in a row canceled now, which is like everyone else in the country. And, but, you know, for the most part, we're healthy. We live in a nation where, you know, we have outstanding healthcare. Governments are making, you know, reasonably sound decisions most of the time. And we have no food shortage. We're not in a war-torn area. And, you know, we don't have other raving diseases heading around the place. We still have our fair share of diseases and things that happen in a mature country like ours. But, you know, we're doing okay, right? It's not catastrophic. And I think that's where people have to zoom out. I think we're going to talk about more around perseverance. You've got to look at the bigger picture here, because there are some parts of this country, some parts of this world, where we're in the hurt locker in a serious way. And, you know, we've got very little to complain about.
Yeah, I think stepping back and looking at the big picture on that's super important. One thing I wanted to kind of stick on before we shift completely into perseverance is because this is a really interesting thing, I think, because for a while we were speculating on what it would look like if there was a second full-on lockdown. And, you know, Dad, to your point, I think that the fear of what people might react, how people might react to that is one reason why some countries have been more hesitant with what's going on right now. And I think that you touched on one aspect of it, which is like the lessons learned, and that you can come into it, you know, with a better mindset, having been through it before. Is there much of the other side of things to where it's like, look, you gave everyone the gap of freedom for a little bit and got back out there living life, and then coming back, that it's a harder adjustment? Or has it been more on the positive side? Because I think this is an interesting thing that, you know, is a thought experiment for most places.
Yeah, look, I know that like our state leader, our premier, so our governor in the equivalent of the US, was very reluctant to put us into lockdown. Like the language being used around the idea of lockdown, the psychology of being locked down, is never a good thing, and she avoided it for the longest time for that exact reason. But, you know, we saw the impact of what the first lockdown was as a community, as a population. We knew how aggressive it was, and it worked. But that was at a different time. And, you know, it's really interesting. The population at large now has such a a significantly different understanding of public health and actually virology and actually inflammation and actually the impact of what this can happen. I mean, this morning, I just finished looking at the data that comes through most mornings here. We have now our first 26-year-old intensive care admission for COVID. And that is the first time, that is the youngest that we've seen so far in our country. And if you think about the narrative of just a year ago, maybe 18 months ago, this was an old person's disease. This was something that people had to be really worried about. And so for us, people have just sort of stopped and gone, they're my kids' age, they're my age, they're all these things. And while vaccines are being rolled out, I think everyone's sort of just got a different level of perspective and just gone, actually, I don't want to be that person because that person could now be me. And I think there's more of that now, which makes it easier. But there's also this really interesting situation where there are others that still don't believe it's them. But I think they're in the minority. And I think when we think about things like vaccine hesitancy and the like, yes, it's present, but for some reason it feels like it's less than it probably has been, you know, in other conditions where other vaccines for children and things were in dispute. I think it's less here now because we're all kind of in it together.
That's a great point. The vaccine thing's always an interesting thought process, you know, because all of a sudden we've all become experts on how the vaccines are tested and before
That's right.
before they come out, right? And then when something comes out and it doesn't follow the standard protocol, us experts again, you know, we're all like, oh my gosh, no, danger. Well,
That's it.
Still, you know just as well as I do, being a military guy, that we never got a choice in our shots, and that is just the way it goes. And I think it's really interesting how, you know, this perspective continues to circulate around. And I'm even going to bring it back into the, you know, we had everything seemed to be happy-go-lucky, and then all of a sudden we had to shut things down again. And there's a lot of frustration, but I find it interesting how you described it of the reality, because, you know, in the U.S., I've always said this, we have an attitude of not in my backyard. You know, oh yes, we need a drug rehabilitation thing. We need a lot of those because of all the opioid crisis and all that. Just as long as you don't build it near my house, you know, go put it over there by Joe's house, but not mine. And it's a very, very interesting thing how, and I think it's, you know, it's part of the American culture, but it's also a part of the human nature, I think, is, well, yeah, that needs to be taken care of, but it needs to be over there. And from what you're describing, it sounds like the reality is coming home to everybody.
Yeah, and look, I think the way that can be evidenced, and we've seen this happen a few times. There was a semi-minor outbreak that happened around Christmas time, or actually earlier. And what was interesting was that we look at things like the testing rates for people, and there was a really significant spike. I mean, we had a record in our state of 67 or 70,000 tests done in a single 24-hour period, which was up orders of magnitude from where it was the day before, and it was the way in which the community just rallied around it. And it was quite a graduated response to what had happened. Somebody had come back from overseas, somebody had gone home, and all of a sudden this very large area, I mean large for us, was sort of put into a sort of nominal lockdown. And the testing rates went through the roof, and we were able to get on top of it relatively quickly. Like, again, people's holidays were impacted, but everyone sort of stepped up, and it was, we need to get control of this. And that's happened a couple of times in different sort of areas, but it's interesting how people have really just, come together and just gone, I think regardless of our points of view, we've got to go shoulder to shoulder on this, because if we don't, then we're going to have really big problems downstream. And I think, what we're seeing in a lot of the data and the numbers here, and not just in Australia, in the States, in India, in the UK, we're all trying to get back to normalcy of some kind. We're all trying to rush the vaccine to the extent that we can. It's not working as fast. We're all really frustrated about it. But, if we don't get a handle on making this thing a common cold, then we've got a lot of bigger issues that we've got to worry about that people can't even imagine how difficult that's going to get. So, the fight, we had this great debate in our politics recently where, getting vaccinated is not a race. Let me give you the red hot tip. It is absolutely a race. And it is really, really critical to get that done so that we can just make it a common cold. Because at some point in the coming years, it's going to be, have you had your flu shot? And your flu shot's also going to be your COVID shot, and it's all going to be wrapped up in one, and life will just be normal, right? But as normal as it can be, we've got to get to that point as quickly as we can.
I think you make a great point of when you step back and look at the big picture of reality and what's happening, how it's all about coming together, standing shoulder to shoulder, as you put it. And I think it's so funny because when you really look at the big picture of things and the chain reactions of stuff, these things that we get latched onto and have these fights about are so like not essential when you look at the grand scheme of things that are happening. Like
Yeah.
you get in this huge political debate about this one thing, and then like taking the vaccine as the example, and then you point out like the reality of what it's going to be like in not that long, and it's just looks so foolish to have these arguments now, to where it's like, look, we can all agree to disagree on certain things, but there's got to be still a path forward, which is an important thing. But what that brings me back to is you were talking about earlier, the psychology of the lockdown language. And I think that's a really interesting case study when you start talking about leadership during crisis and leading with perseverance for your team. So I would love actually just to start off that conversation, if specific example or generic example wise, if you could think of some language tool or anything like that the not governor, you said, I think premier, that
Yeah.
your governor, there we go, that go being dumb American on that one, but you're as far as the language being used in order to recognize the downside of certain types of language around lockdown and those type of words, and then using things that aren't portrayed as negatively.
Yeah, so I think there's a sort of a volume and frequency component to this, as well as a actual language component. So there's nothing worse than knowing that a situation could be getting worse, but not having any real discussion or narrative around what is happening at the time. So here every day at 11 o'clock, we get an update from the government on what's happening. They publish numbers, both new cases, testing rates, just using the COVID example. And so everyone locks onto Twitter at 11 a.m. or jumps onto a news feed, and most news outlets are live streaming the Premier's news conference, which goes about 20, 30 minutes, and there are a bunch of folks that speak at it. What she does in that news conference, and it's different for different states, but in our context, she is a super compassionate person that understands, we have one in four Australians about living in our state. So we have a pretty significant component of the population here. It's a highly multicultural environment that we have. And so there are many different cultures, many different languages. And what we find with her is that she is trying to highlight that we are in it all together, regardless of where we come from. What's actually what makes Australia quite a brilliant country. But when we end up having to see and hear the bad news, she will be very frank about that. So she won't beat around the bush. She will be, we are going to go into lockdown because of this. We didn't want to do this. I want to stress to you that it was a decision that wasn't taken lightly. And in some cases where she was a close contact of someone recently, she had to go into home isolation as well. And so this can happen to anyone. And she was very, very she was very clear about that. The language that she used has always been, and I think the best leaders always are calm. They tell it as they see it. They give perspective and they give scenarios off the back of that. But probably most importantly is that they don't let a lot of time lapse between the last time they spoke, but they're not speaking all the time. And that's the balance, right? So you don't want people sort of just continuously speaking at you. You want to know that in the smaller chunk of time that you've got to predict what's going to happen, in our case, like it's literally a 24-hour news cycle. But on this particular issue, people know to expect that 11 a.m. is what's coming. So if good news or bad news is going to come, it's going to come at that point. So if it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, like just get on with the day, right? Because you know the window you need, and then you move on. And that's a pretty sort of aggressive time frame, but we're in a sort of a battle with a disease at the moment. From my point of view, at Drop and my other interests, it's really important just to have the drumbeat, whatever it is, so that people can expect to hear from you. Because there's a golden rule in life, right? Which is no surprises. Humans don't do well with surprises. And to the extent that you can create an environment where there is the ability for people to hear from you regularly, whether that's an email, or it's a Slack message, whether it's, a press conference, whether it's an investor update, do what you said you would do appear, show up, use what we talked about previously. You look at the Stockdale paradox as a really important guiding principle. Hope is not a strategy, right? But having unwavering belief that you will succeed in what you've set out to succeed is a really important tenet. And the second tenet to the Stockdale paradox is, that's why it's a paradox, is that you want to tell it how it is, right? This is where we're at. That will change day by day, week by week, month by month. And it's a difficult conversation to have because you might end up feeling like a broken record, right? But that's leadership. So if you don't want to do it, then don't lead. It's pretty simple.
You know,
I got to jump on that
right.
because I'm reading Pat Lencioni's latest book. It's now I just drew a blank on the name of it, but it's there we go. That's why I keep the shelf there. It's called The Motive. And he was just taught this towards the end here, and he's kind of doing the review because it's well written. It's kind of a little narrative about leadership, and then he goes into the the hardcore academics at the back of the book. But he was part I was just reading this morning was that fact of, as a leader, you got to communicate and you got to say it over and over and over again. And if you don't want to say it over and over and over again, then you shouldn't be leading. I mean, you hit the nail right on the head, what Pat Lencioni is talking about in that book. And then I just, with Admiral Stockdale, for those of you who aren't familiar with Admiral Stockdale, he's Congressional Medal of Honor. He was shot down in Vietnam. He was a captain in the Navy, if I remember right, when he was shot down, the highest ranking guy, ended up in Hanoi Hilton, tortured, beaten, isolation, all these sort of things. But yet he never wavered in what he was going to accomplish. And that's the Stockdale paradox. I believe he was in Hanoi Hilton for 5 years or maybe 6. Right. 5 years. Yeah. Just an amazing story. And oh, by the way, he developed his principles of survival there, and it talks about it in his book when he got ejected, but it came from his life studying the Stoics and philosophy in college right before he deployed to Vietnam. So thanks for bringing that up. It's an amazing story with Admiral Stockdale.
Yeah, I think the thing that I love about that principle is that it's not something you have to be a scholar to understand, right? Whatever your context is, if you're a community leader, if you're a son, if you're a daughter, if you're a mother or father, the people who went before you to forge that knowledge, whether it be the Stoics or Stockdale himself, they've gone through hell and back, right, to try and work this through, and they've given us the gift of this, this principle that we can just keep in mind. And as you do, if you use that as a mechanism to zoom out, then you'll become instantly grateful for what you've got around you. And that way, it just sort of helps you get through the days. Now, just going back on that point of having to show up on the leadership front, there's nothing more difficult, I don't think, in leading any of the things I've led before than having to show up all the time and appear sort of straight and level, right? It's hard enough to keep a plane straight and level. But when you've got to try and do that to yourself all the time and just appear normal and considered, that takes a toll, right? Because, who do you talk to try and sort of vent and feel okay about things? And that just goes to the next level where, you want to make sure you're surrounded by your tribe of folks who you can vent to and just be a normal guy or a normal girl. But that cannot be the people you're leading. Right. And so when you sort of think about the levels of this, I think it's really important to know that leaders aren't perfect. They won't get it right all the time. They're trying to do the best they can. But it's really up to you as the leader to find your support structures. And, Otis, we've talked about this many times before. You need to be able to have that there so that you can be normal and human. Otherwise you'll get wound up pretty tight and then something will break and that won't be a fun experience.
Oh, then you're really letting down the team. You're not just
right.
It's that personal maintenance we talk about all the time. If you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of other people.
Yep.
And I can imagine, I can empathize with you somewhat in that dealing with your team. How are you communicating with your team? What tools do you use now to kind of keep them in the loop and keep things going?
Yeah, so at Drop, we're a team of 10 people. We're highly distributed. We're even more distributed now that we're in lockdown. And I think the thing for us is that we have a regular drumbeat of conversations that we have as a group and as individuals every week, every fortnight, whether that be one-on-ones or it's stand-ups as we call them, or team meetings. And so I attend many of them, and just to either be there as somebody who's providing mission intent, or the guidelines for what needs to go on, or just to be somebody just to listen. But I think the thing that has changed for me over the last 2 years has been learning to ask really good questions that go beyond work, so I can understand where the stress points are. I have one of my people who is at that stage of life where they're trying to, buy a house and settle down and do all these sort of things. And so their need for certain things is very different to the person that's just, running hard because they've got a bit of resource behind them and they're trying to do things. And so it's really important to get a relationship together where you can understand that. And so you can tweak opportunities and the way that the way the world is playing out for them. Because the more you understand that, the better you can be as a leader. And I've seen too many people, particularly recently, where they've just assumed the stress of work was too high. And my question then was, well, do you understand what else is happening? Like, is there something else happening? Me knowing full well there was, and what those things were. And for them to go, oh, I never knew that. And I said, well, get better at knowing that, right? Because, we don't just come to work. We don't do work 24/7, right? We've got lives and things going on. And the best thing you can do is just understand a little bit more about someone's life. Not a lot, like you don't have to spend days with them understanding it. But if you ask the right questions and just listen, then you'll learn a lot.
Oh yeah.
Something that's changed a fair bit.
Yeah. But I think that's such a fundamental leadership thing. And what we're talking about of, you got to understand what your team members want to do. What's their life goals? What maybe not their life goals, maybe not that deep, but why are they there? Are they there because they need a paycheck? Are they there because they like the job? Are they there because a friend recommended they do this? Or are they there because mom said they should get that kind of job? All these sort of things. Why are they there? And how do they fit into that picture? Because it's such a critical piece as a leader of understanding what, because what's our job as a leader is to help our team perform at a higher level than they believe they can, to challenge them and have them exceed at what they want to do. Right. And then do that as a team. And that's a powerful place. That's the ultimate goal of all the leaders.
Yeah.
You can't do that if you don't know what's the foundation of the individual in your organization. And it is just so fundamental to that. And without getting over the board. I mean, you mentioned that a little bit. And what I mean is there still has to be the leader subordinate sort of relationship. But as the leader, you've got to know what makes that person tick, because otherwise, how do you know which button to push to get them to calm down or to get them to get fired up? I mean, you got to know those things. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I think there's two mechanisms I've become they've become my favorite go-to things to ask. And it starts really, really early. Like if somebody in the work context is going to end up working for me, then I ask them questions which are uncomfortable, not because they're difficult to answer, but because they've never been asked before. And the first one of those questions is, so what do you want to be remembered for? Because I'm not going to ask anybody, where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? I think that's the dumbest question you could possibly ask a human, right? Because what are they going to say? It'll be a fabricated thing they're doing on the fly to try and impress whatever the context of the situation is. If you ask and position someone to answer the question, so on your dying breath, what do you want to be known for? Give me a couple of things. I don't go as far as to say, tell me what will be sort of chiseled on your tombstone, right? But tell me what you're going to be remembered for. And that gives you a very human answer often, right? Some people can't answer it. But I tell them that if we're going to work together, I need an answer to that question, because I want them to be thinking about that, right? So that's the first one. Second one is, if they've advanced down an interview sort of pathway, I ask them about what is their next play if they're successful with us. And that is, really about, how, and I tell them, look, you might not, I expect you not to have an answer for this because it's an awkward question. I'm not trying to hire you to fire you. I'm not trying to hire you to get rid of you and to move you on. I'm trying to work out that given your grand scheme of things, how do I give you the opportunities and guide you to develop you in the time you'll be with us so that you're ready for that next play. And people often get taken aback by that. I think sort of 9.9 times out of 10, it'll be, I never thought of that question. I said, well, it's a bit like joining the military, right? The issue with joining the military when you're young is that no one tells you what might come next. They'll tell you all the great opportunities you'll have in the military, because that's the pitch. But as we give advice to young school leavers coming out now, sort of enlisting, or even going through to, our equivalent of Annapolis, for us, it's, let's imagine you're going to spend 5 years there. You might spend 20. Let's imagine you spend 5. What would you do after that? Let's broaden your horizon a little bit, because we want you to know that when you come out of really intense environments like the military, like a venture, like whatever it is, and you don't have what's next, then you'll fall in a gigantic heap, right? And so it's those kind of mechanisms I found to be really, really helpful. And they're fun conversations because they often go in directions you don't expect. That's where the relationship gets formed. And that's how you get to know what else happens in someone's life. And I'm just really surprised more people don't do it. And I kind of hope more people do. I just don't know of too many that do.
That immediately brings to mind coaching here with the University of Arizona for the rugby team.
Sure.
Because for so many jobs, you like you said, you don't want to hire to fire. People look at it as like such a negative thing. But when you look at like the rugby pipeline, and especially when you look at the individuals in that pipeline, there's so many different ways that people are going, and you want what's best for the individual. You don't want what's best for your organization. Right. And I think to paint that kind of example of what if, every single kid that comes to University of Arizona, you just assume that they're going to go play professional rugby. Like those kids are going to come out screwed up, and they're going to have some serious issues in 4 to 5 years when they graduate, right. If they graduate, because they're not looking at the big scheme of things. You got to have a realistic picture of what you're getting into so that, you don't waste that time, especially with the example of college, of when you should be preparing for that next journey. And then instead you're preparing for a journey that you're never going to have.
Yeah, it's so true, right, Camden? And so I teach entrepreneurship at the University of New South Wales, and I'm a different cut of professor, I think, than most others. Most people come to business school.
Better be. That's all I gotta
say. It's funny, right? Most people come to business school to pivot their careers, and they're trying to work out what comes next. They go to business school. They think that consulting is a good, like management consulting, a good sort of pivot out, do some generalist stuff, reset, then find what you want to do. And I make no bones about this to the head of school and the dean of the school, that my job is to fundamentally ensure that people do not do that. And that what happens during their time with me, which is usually 12 weeks or so in one subject in entrepreneurship, is that I'm going to teach them how to think so differently that they can use that really discrete 12 or 15 month period where they're not working, they're just learning, to cultivate the ideas they've always wanted to capitalize on. And my measure of success is not, the grades they come out with, it's how many ideas and ventures get built in the background. And it's one of those things where, we've taken the course that I do as an elective. Now it's one of the core parts of the MBA. And I love it because the number of times that people come into it going, one, I didn't know that, entrepreneurship was a thing. I just never knew about it, is small, but it's getting less. And you have people that said, I never knew that I could dedicate this amount of time to, having the enjoyment of building out an idea, whether it's a t-shirt brand or whether it's a new technology or whatever. But the creativity that comes from that is extraordinary. And I think sometimes it takes the teacher to sort of say, this is what's happening. But I think most people go into education hoping that they can have that effect of helping, people sort of zoom out and see the bigger picture for themselves. And I hope more people do that, because to your point, you get a really discrete amount of time in the big scheme of things to actually just sit there and enjoy the process of learning, because you don't have to rush off to work and you don't have the other pressures. So if you're contemplating going to business school or anywhere else for that matter for education, fight to find a way to enjoy the process. Because the amount of times you get that in life, particularly at our age, it sort of goes down, right? Because you got other stuff.
Oh yeah, those other responsibilities. Yeah, so true. I love that concept of, if you're going to do it right and commit to it. That is so awesome. And I just bring us back around to the Persevere and thinking how your team, you got the Drop Bio team, about 10 folks. You've got Be in Motion, which we haven't even talked about yet. Just another, sure. By the way, Phil does a few things on the side, plus has a couple of little girls and all that other stuff. But how is being in motion still? Because when you're locked down, how are you fostering that still?
So look, the backstory on Be in Motion started around the same time that Drop started, actually maybe a year before. So yeah, like my career post military has been start a company goes well, not so well, get a job, refuel, build another company, goes well, doesn't go well, get another job, build another company, right? So it goes through this cycle. And so, as you get better at company building, you don't have to get the job as much anymore. At the end of my last 2 ventures ago, I think I just took some time out just to sort of breathe a little bit. And I was wandering through hospitals as part of the initial product development work for what became Drop. And I noticed this thing, and this is where Be in Motion came from. I noticed this very repeated flower delivery experience that I just couldn't stop seeing, like a confirmation bias in a really significant way. And Cam, I don't know if we've spoken about this or not, but there was a situation where you would see somebody like a nurse or a warden bring flowers for a patient. And I'd sort of look around the corner and you would see the look on the person's face when they realized the flowers were for them. And if you started to stopwatch and then stopped it at the point at which the person realized who they were from, there was like this look on their face of thanks and gratitude and disbelief that someone would take the time out of their day to actually make them feel better in a hospital ward.
Right.
And I must have seen this happen hundreds of times, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And it was at a time where I just figured the world could do with a little bit more encouragement like that. So how do you democratize, again, that flower delivery experience, but not for flowers, for other stuff? And so all I could think about was this idea of being in motion, right? Putting one step ahead of the other. And what if, yes, resilience and yes, being hard and storming hard and doing all this stuff is important. What if encouragement is the other side of that coin? And what if you could make that something material for people just on an ordinary given day? So I wrote some software that was sort of under this project title Be in Motion, which is now trademarked and has become a little bit larger. And someone could go on our website. They could write a message. The message was printed out in a card and sent to people in normal mail, and it would arrive at their houses. But when they open the card, you wouldn't know who it's from, but the message was very specific for you. So it's a little bit weird until you scan the QR code on the back of the card and it revealed the person that sent the card on your screen. And then it said to you, well, I hope it made your day. And the screen jumped out, right? There was confetti and a whole bunch of celebration happening digitally. And then it was, well, how about you send that on to someone else? And what we found was that people were doing this all around the world. Then companies started doing it for the people who are remote working, just as something that was very inexpensive, but super just interesting. And it just really landed, they took the time to thank me for the work that I was doing. So fast forward to a little while ago, we started to make apparel that told them the message of Be in Motion. And now when people go on the site, they buy a piece of apparel. We donate to a mental health charity for youth as part of that purchase. And then you get 2 tokens to send 2 of these cards around the world. And so that became something bigger than I expected, if I'm honest. Like it was a fun project on the side. And then it became, I can't do 2 jobs. So I went and built a separate team that runs Be in Motion. And they do a fabulous job. And so, they're the kind of things that you want to try and push the world forward, right? So for me, I characterize myself in 3 ways. I'm a girl dad, and that is code for I'm a raging feminist, and I will beat the table hard to make sure that that equality is there amongst the sexes and other minorities. Because I just think you do better when you've got a diversity of thinking, and if you push people out of that, then more sadness for you, really. So Girl Dad 1, I'm obviously a serial entrepreneur. I can't help but see business models everywhere I look. I love it. I just love building things and seeing them be successful. And I'm an educator 3rd. And, I love teaching because why wouldn't you want to pay what you know forward? So it's those things that make sense, and in terms of lockdown, Otis, and being in motion, like Be in Motion just says, get out of bed, put some shoes on and go for a walk. Go and breathe in fresh air, go and see some stuff. This is not profound, right? This is not new. This is just a reminder to get off your ass and do something that could be nice. And if you've got enough energy, do something nice for someone else, because they won't expect it. And if you do it well, that will have reverberation, because it's free and it helps. And it's good to be like that as a human.
Well, that's great. And as we're wrapping up, I do have to go back. So changing the subjects a little bit on this,
Sure.
because I didn't get my question out earlier, Dad. Thank you.
That's right. I cut you off, didn't I?
Believe it or not, that doesn't happen too often. But something I thought that was really worth coming back to, because we're talking about the importance of communicating as a leader and communicating to your team regularly. And that really had me thinking about is, certainty as an idea for your team, and how certainty, like most other things, would have a half-life, that it degrades over time.
Sure.
And that basically you have to just stay in front of that curve and make sure you're putting out the information. And the big takeaway from that then is that chaotic situations have a much, much shorter halftime. And however much worse the situation is, the more that you need to be communicating to your team that everything will be okay and we're still working towards this, and then we still look at the big picture of things. If everything's going normal, that email every Friday where you say, hey guys, great job, we're still moving towards our goals, is enough. When you're in the middle of a lockdown, you got to get in that 24-hour cycle. But I just wanted to go circle back on that. Not even much of a question, just really thought that was an interesting point that I wanted to hammer on at the end here.
Yeah, look, I think the only other thing to add to that is that if you don't have the answers, then don't try and create the answer, right? So if you've done a good job in bringing a great team around you, and look, it's a pursuit, right? In any given point, in any given day, you hope you've got the right team. But when you're, whether it's in sport, whether it's in business, our job as leaders, beyond creating other leaders, is to have the right talent in the right positions for the right time. And that's just an ongoing thing, right? So if you have that, and like, more power to you, it happens to me. I feel like it happens to me from time to time. And right now is one of those times, which is awesome. But the thing is that if you don't have the answer, don't forget that the great people you've got around you are likely to have answers too, and they're probably going to be better than yours. So if you don't know, then say, like, I don't know, but I'd love to talk to you all about it, because I feel like I need your help on that. And that shouldn't be the norm, right? Because you're the leader, but you shouldn't always have the answers. I think for people that always have the answers, I think there's an underlying tendency for narcissism there, which I think sort of breeds things that can be a little bit worse downstream. So I'm very happy, and I learned this from a mentor of mine. If I don't know, I just tell them I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think I found in my experience with business and, giving presentations and those type of things, that one of the best things you could say when somebody stumps you with a question, because there's always that guy in the audience who just wants to stump the person talking.
Yes, there is.
It's just, I don't know. What do you think? Because if they are thinking that hard about trying to poke a hole through something, they've got to have good reasons for it. So put the spotlight back on them. Let's see what they have to think about the situation, right? But, and then, like, aside from getting a little shot in at the person trying to mess up your presentation, really you're starting a dialogue of somebody who's obviously put thought into it, and you're opening up a real conversation to find the best answer there that you don't know. So I think that's a huge thing. That's always a great lesson to learn.
Yep.
Good stuff. Appreciate it. And Phil, man, great to see you. So we're going to shift gears to what'd you learn? And it's been a long time since I had Camden go first. So I guess I'll let you go, because Phil's here,
Okay, got it.
What'd you learn,
nice
Cam?
for Phil. So I loved, beginning of the conversation is pretty short, but we were talking about over the last year or so the thought experiment of the psychology of the second lockdown. So I just thought that was super interesting. Obviously there's a whole bunch of different variables between where you are in Australia and where each of us are in the US and any other place in the world. There's a lot of variables to play with, but super interesting to kind of hear how that thought experiment's playing out in reality. So that's what I learned today.
Phil, how about you?
Look, I love being able to have the perspective of people that are operating on a bigger scale. Like the US is on obviously a vastly different scale. The perspectives that you both bring are just really they're grounded in that larger sort of narrative, and it's refreshing. It's zooming out, right? So I love just hearing how that's playing out for you guys, and obviously seeing you again. It's been too long between drinks, and I love seeing your newsletter every week. I read it religiously, and it's just a pleasure to keep doing it. That's the drumbeat I expect from you, and you keep on delivering it, and it's just great. So keep it up.
I appreciate that. Yeah, sometimes I wonder how much longer, but it continues to flow out. So I do appreciate that. And for me, what I learned, I love those 2 interview questions to get to know, what do you want to be known for? And what is there next for you if you're successful here? And I love that one because I've actually played with that one. Camden and I brought in an intern into Tribe and Purpose, and that's one of the things that I harp on that intern is, hey, at the end of this internship, you may have a job here, you may want to go do something else. If you want to go do something else, we want to help you achieve that. Whether it's funding your startup or introducing you to your next boss and that other corporation or whatever. So I think those are great questions to help just help you as a leader understand the people on your team and where they're going. And you know what? Everybody gets all worried about the whole HR stuff and those 2 questions, those don't even have to deal with that sort of stuff. That makes it even better. So thanks for sharing those. What's the best way for people to be in motion, check out Drop Bio or anything else that you have going on?
Yeah, look, I think the epicenter for me online is my own blog where you can find links to everything else. So it's philhsc.com. And hit me up on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect. All the professional stuff is there. But it's good to catch up with old friends. So thanks for making the time.
Yeah, great to have you. And like you said, it was just a little too far between drinks, so we'll have to make sure we fix that next time. Appreciate it again. Hey, Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to today's show. Special thanks to our guest, Phil Hayes, for joining us today, and our sponsors, Tribe and Purpose. Find your purpose, build your tribe. You can check out recent episodes of The Cam and Otis Show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, and check out a full archive at thecamandotisshow.buzzsprout.com. The Cam and Otis Show is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next week.